All right, so we got another episode of Take Your Mountain. I'm your host, Jason Weimer, here with our guest, Mick Pickett. And this week we're going to be transitioning a little bit from some of the deeper content. We talked about moving into more of the rest of the message about using entrepreneurship to drive positive change, kind of how we see business and kingdom coming together. So with that, let's start off maybe with a question or two.
Yeah, one of the main questions since I've known you for the last couple of years is the topic of the 7 mountains keep coming up. So I've looked into it a little bit. A lot of it seems true, but I don't have like a great understanding of it. So I know that you're deeply invested in that. I'd love to hear how you got to where you got to this place of conviction and just like some insights that you want to share.
Sure. Well, actually, when I think about the roots of this whole thought process, it actually started back in college. I kind of describe my school experience was I lived in Illinois, so we didn't have school choice as much as we do in Minnesota. So I'll be honest, it felt like I was on a treadmill from kindergarten to, I could choose my college, but I was getting to be about 22, 23 and just felt like on a treadmill the whole time. So as college came to the end and he was figuring out, okay, real life's hitting. What am I going to do with my life? It was a natural time to reflect, and I'm kind of a naturally introspective person. But it was definitely a natural time to reflect on life and where we got. And without getting into all the details, one of the things I noticed was I looked at the time. When you're in your 20s, you're always in a hurry, right? I've since learned to chill out a little bit. But in reviewing my schooling, I realized I felt like I could have probably got done faster. Whether it was 2 years, 3 years, I could have been done faster. And I was starting to deconstruct like why that might be or why that was. But it led me to kind of study or think about the larger educational system. And I came up with this term, one size fits none. And it certainly was true in my microcosm where I grew up. I had a brother, super bright guy, needed a different kind of learning style. He did not have a great outcome. He ended up dropping out and then getting a GED, and like he's a super bright guy. And that was like a kind of a travesty. And not to mention the drugs and all that other stuff. If you don't fit the mold, like they put you on. And then I found myself like different type of learning style. School actually was designed for someone that doesn't mind sitting around thinking about stuff. So anyway, as I was studying all that, I bumped into this idea about a voucher system. So if you're not familiar with voucher system, let's go back to cheeseburgers. So you like cheeseburgers,
Of course,
right? How many different kinds of cheeseburger can we get in America, right? You could go to McDonald's, you go to the steakhouse, you pick the kind of cheeseburger you want. We got infinite number of price points, different styles, low quality, high quality. It's up to you. You get to decide, right? So we look at education. Well, it's the exact opposite. You grow up in an area, you go to that school unless you're independently wealthy. That's where I grew up. That was basically true. Mm-hmm. And even $3,000 a year of tuition for a one income family, it was like, nope, you're going to the public school. So I learned about the voucher system, which is basically, at the time I did some research. I think the college I went to was $15,000 to $20,000 of tuition. The high school spent roughly $11,000 a year on students. So less, but not much less than my college. And I was like, man, if my family had access to even a fraction of that money, not 11, but there was a private school for $3,000, $4,000, $5,000. Like if we had access to even a fraction of that, it would have opened up a lot of options. And so I ended up doing a little more research on this whole thing. Went pretty deep for a little while just because I was curious. And I basically just concluded every single argument that I heard against it just didn't hold any water. It was like, oh, well, poor people would be injured. It's like, really? Poor people? Like if you gave me $10,000 per student, like I'd be kind of excited to start a school. I'm like entrepreneurial. I'd enjoy that challenge. Like, oh, fatherless kids and low income, like game on. Let's create the Burger King of, the hamburger shop that's built for that consumer, that family. You name it, like a good, well-meaning entrepreneur coming in could solve tons of problems. And then it's like, well, then it would pull these kids away from the schools. It's like, so they'd be served somewhere over here. Oh, well, it would defund that facility. Well, man, an entrepreneur should be able to figure out how to use that facility and then have, instead of one tenant controlling everything, you have 18 tenants and they all, you need a field house, you need a swimming pool, you need a track. Cool. You pay 1/18 of the expense. And I'm pretty sure there's money left over to have a higher education and a profit motive. It doesn't have to be a profit motive, but that'd be one way to design it. Anyway, I went through this whole process and I kept coming up against a power structure though. I'm 23, 24 years old. I can't do anything about this. I'm just doing the research and realizing there's not a chance in HE double hockey sticks this is gonna happen. Why? Well, that's when I started bumping up against these power structures. And in this case, it's the teachers union. Like, I don't know the first flipping thing about the teachers union. All I know is that every time someone tries to bring up the voucher system, which clearly is superior in almost every conceivable way, it's getting knocked down. And the funding source, the money, the power behind it is the union. And you get into it a little deeper, unions are not at all foreign to being influenced. Anytime you see monopoly power, there's a reason. There's a power. There's an agenda. There's a reason behind it. There's a reason they're consolidating that and they're wielding that. So oftentimes unions, they're just that. There are a monopoly of labor in this case. There's one union across the entire United States that coordinates all the teachers. And I don't know what percentage you need to be, but like 30, 40, 50% of the people can be completely against it as teachers. And they have no choice but to participate. And then whatever they decide gets decided. So again, 23 years old, like that's demonstrably true. I'm not an expert, but I did enough research to realize it's just true. What could I do about it? Not really anything. Just stick a pin in it. That's an entrepreneurial idea. It definitely could work. It needs government support. It needs a bunch of things to even have a chance, but that could lead to tremendously better outcomes. And it's just a curiosity, like a burning entrepreneurial curiosity. Like what's possible if something like that was pursued? But I'm going a little deeper dive on that, but it was, I started to branch off of that. I kind of put a pin in that, set it aside. And then around the same time, I took a job that like I had some time to think. And it was my first job out of college. And another thing, just kind of like intellectual exercise, as I think we're coming up on an election cycle. Maybe one thing led to the next where I was like, oh, this union stuff, the government could do something about this, but also they're not. Mm-hmm. So let me let me lift the hood up onto the government side of things. So I went into that, read your history books, going back in time, 1776, like the Federalist Papers, our founding fathers, like what were they trying to do when they started the country? Well, this idea of monopoly power comes back in, and they're basically saying, we don't believe in monopoly as how we should structure our government. In the sense, King George or whatever, he represents monopoly, one all powerful figure that controls everything. Maybe we get better outcomes if we divide up power and have people actually, what is a country? A country should be there to do what? To serve its people. Not the other way around. A country should be there to serve your people. Each one of us, if you really get to the spiritual roots, are sovereign individuals, like legally, like we should control ourselves. And we agree to bind with one another for various collective gain. War, for instance. Like if I try to fight off my neighbor, it's a little easier if I got someone else swinging an axe or whatever. So we designed the country with all this. They were very forward thinking. Like again, back to education. These are guys who are done with college at 18, 19, like already serving in Congress in their 20s. Like that's another world. Like what, when you really go back and look at the facts, it's kind of wild. But again, this idea of monopoly power and how should things be structured? Well, it was designed from the get-go to give strength and power to the states, and only certain things were given to the federal government. Mm-hmm. That was done on purpose. And why? To create competition. Like, you don't like this state's policy? Great. Hop the border, right? And then actually, even at the state level, they were limited in their power. And then the idea was to keep power as close to the people as possible. All right, so you lift your hood up and like, okay, there's this power structure, the teacher union, actually being reinforced by power at the governmental level, as I realized. And I was like, okay, I would like to change something with that. Well, good luck. You are at the federal level, you are 1/300 millionth. Now you have some kids in there, right? They can't vote. You are powerless, and you know it, right? At least at the state level, cut that up by 50, and then divide up by the number of people actually act politically active. Well, that's a much smaller number. I could maybe, and then if I influence, like I have a chance, I have a fighting chance. That is not how our system works. Take our IRS financial system. If you divide up all the revenue, where it's taken from and where it goes, I don't know the exact figure offhand, but it's like 90% of the revenue goes federal. Follow the money. If you don't have the money, money is the power. So and by the way, we didn't start this way. That wasn't until 1913 that we even had an income tax. We had zero income tax prior to that point for like 100 and what is that? Almost 40, 50 years. Somehow our country managed to get by. But it's somewhere along the way that got flipped on its head. And now instead of the revenue going to the states and local governments, if any, let's pause for a moment. Can you imagine what life would be like if you earned $1 and you walked home with $1? What would that do to Starbucks stock? What would that do to Best Buy? You name like consumer goods. Like you get to keep your money, get to save your money. That's, I wouldn't say another subject, but it's all tied together. I'm peeling back layers of the onion. And again, we come up against power. Like somehow, some way, the way our country was designed to operate to hold people accountable was circumvented in a pretty profound way. Here we are, 2020, well, 2007-ish is when I was heavy into this. I mean, we're supposed to be this progressive. We got iPhones, we got cars, we got all this stuff. You go back 200 years to living in New England and do some research. I mean, just look at their dress, the pictures. I mean, they dressed to the nines. They had horses, carriages, homelessness, zero. Like, we think our standard of living's high now. Oh, they had horses, so they're backward. They were very prosperous. All right, so start off with education, leads you to government, take a path down history lane. I started studying Benjamin Franklin and like, why were these colonies so prosperous? Then you backdoor into the economics of it. Their money was completely different than the money we have today. They didn't have a debt-based fiat system. They had a credit. I stumbled on this article. It was actually by Ben Franklin. And he was explaining, Ben Franklin was born here, lived here on the East Coast, went back to England, our mother country, right? Supposed to be progressive, all this stuff. And he gets there and there's squalor everywhere. Homeless people at the time, Oliver Twist type stuff. And basically like, what the heck? Here I'm over in America, the colonies, the backward, it'd be like us talking about third world country today. He goes back to the mothership, the franchisor, and it's just a shambles. And he was explaining the difference between, he attributed basically 100% of the difference to their money system. Then what's called colonial scrip, which was a way of, it was a money supply that could expand to meet the demand of the goods. It wasn't, I'm going off memory here, so I could give more specifics, but it wasn't printed in excessively or anything, but there was a certain amount of money. It was done responsibly. It was independent of England. It facilitated all this trade, which allowed them to amass real goods, cotton and all the things of their economy at the time. And then they could trade those goods for what we consider wealth at the time, gold and silver. So the currency was detached from the financial powers that be over in Europe. And if you really follow the history, what actually started the war and what actually ticked off Britain was when they figured out, oh, we're not getting our grift off of using our currency over there. So they started to force us to use their currency, which, without getting into all the details, basically like removed a lot of this benefit. We had to go to them to borrow it, paying high interest, all this stuff, where this other currency was basically created interest-free. And interest is basically a giant brake on the economy. So when they talk about the Tea Party and all this, it was taxes, because taxes was part of it, but it was also tied to this currency. And they're like, you have to use our currency in all your trade. And they're like, no, it's better. So anyway, started off education, led to government. Then we're getting heavy into the econ side of things. And before you know it, it's like, wait a second. Like, these are independent problems. And the entrepreneur in me is like, just excited about, okay, it's like figuring out what the essence of the issue is. And the entrepreneur side is immediately getting to work. Is like, I had ideas for like websites. Like, how could you hold government accountable, right? Like, what would be, Facebook didn't exist at the time. Well, actually it had just begun, but like, how could you create a Facebook-like profile system to basically show that the people want this and they're doing that? I was like, how do you put their feet to the fire? But who knows whether that would actually work, but I was thinking about all this stuff. But when you start to piece this all together, and I could go on and on from there. It led back to media, like our newspapers, these different areas where they all kind of work in concert with one another, these power structures. And I kind of sat there at 23, 24 years old, like I can't fix any of this, but I can observe it's true. And when you start to piece it, well, there's a couple things. One is like, this can all be fixed some way, shape or form. And I just want to be part of the solution. I don't know how to do it exactly. That's ultimately what led to Gratuitous Capital and like this idea of like, if we could raise money with purpose to change the world, like all of these things are could be business ideas, but it requires money and it requires people and come together. So that's what led to me starting this business. But what I realized, I wouldn't even put it in spiritual terms yet. That was later. But there was a consistent power structure behind all these things. And I knew it was wrong. I knew it could be overcome. And I knew it just was. And it was probably 6, 7, 8 years later where I started like, oh, this could be fixed. This could be fixed. This could be fixed. This could be fixed. Like, oh, these are kind of like different areas. Oh, a 7 is kind of a cool number, believer, you know. There's like 7 different areas that if I had to take this platform to its logical conclusion, we would end up with ideas around these different areas. So that's what I basically like, I don't know, I backed into 7 areas that were broken. And I'm like, oh, I didn't call it 7 mountains or anything like that, but it was just like, yep, it's 7. And it's the same issue in all 7 areas, power structures that aren't serving people.
Wow. Cool. Thanks for sharing.
That wasn't very Q&A, but
it's fun to see you get fired up about that as you're coming into your true identity of you're designed to help in some way and be part of the solution.
Yeah.
I think that's really cool. Do you want to tie it into like, so what happened? You must have come across other people talking about 7 mountains at some point. So what was that like for you? Because you've already figured that out.
Kind of interesting. I kind of wanted to tie it back to the spiritual side, because like initially this is just observing data. Like, this is consistent. So there's one something behind all this. And I had been having some deeper spiritual experiences at the time, just connecting with God in profound ways that I'd never connected with him before. And but it wasn't until later where you're like, hey, I'm a Christian, right? And we learn about Adam and Eve and the enemy and all this story. And it's like, oh yeah, Satan. Like, he's a guy, you know, he's an entity. Oh, and there's actually people that follow him. Like, we try to not follow him. We try not to sin. Often we do, and we got to make up for it. But like, there's actually people out there that are like sold out to this guy. And it's like we hear that. But I started to piece together, oh, there's something to that. It's generally secret. It's not something people lead with. It's behind the scenes, you know, learning a little bit about secret societies and different things that are going on. It's like also real. And some of what you're seeing is the manifestation of agreements and power structures that are largely hidden behind the scenes on display. That's why you're like, how is it like this? How I hang out with like lots of good people. There is no one that would do this on purpose. And then you're like, oh, well, maybe it's just an accident. It's like, no, there's actually power structure behind this. So the more I started to realize how real the enemy was, the more it actually made sense that these are actually strategic areas of influence, and whoever holds them dictates what happens in society. It's very obvious. And then, by the way, how many people are willing to spend the time that I did for whatever reason I did this to like figure it out? You know, the Matrix, I'm in the Matrix. What's the Matrix? That movie actually, I think, was very powerful to wake people up to kind of how this works. Because like, if you don't take the time to step back every once in a while, realize what is reality? Who's doing what? Why am I? What treadmill am I on? And where's it going? Do I want to be on this treadmill? How many people poke their head out and look in front of them, behind them? I don't know. For whatever reason, I was gifted with that ability to kind of dissociate and I had the time, honestly. And just realized, man, this when you really look into it, it's kind of jacked up. But again, it can also be fixed. But recognizing that there was stuff that we talk about, the spiritual reality of things, like it's, if you're a believer, obviously you're exposed to this stuff. What does it mean, or how does it manifest in different ways? That's a whole nother question. But my curiosity led me to realize that there was a much deeper reality there than I knew. And there was fertile ground for me to learn more. But it was probably late 2018, 19. I went to the prayer breakfast, probably 10, 11 years in from my initial like download, initial research that led me to these conclusions. And I had just categorized them into 7. It took me like 10 years to like, 7. I got invited to the prayer breakfast in Washington, D.C., and I met this guy, Lance Wallnau, in one of the breakout sessions. And I don't know why I chose it or how I ended up in this breakout session, but he starts talking about 7 mountains and how, as believers, we're meant to be the head, not the tail. He was acknowledging they exist, acknowledging that they're strategic, acknowledging that the enemy has taken a lot of ground in these areas, and also acknowledging that as believers, we're not meant to just sit back and be like, oh, woe is me, but actually to recognize that's true and do our part, small or big. If you want to think in war effort, like whether you're Rosie the Riveter or Special Forces, you're in a stinking war. Recognize that. That's the first step towards something positive, is realize you're in a battle, which we're told, and then do something about it. And had a very positive, solution-oriented, kingdom fruit message to it. Is like, if we actually figure this out and step into the fullness of what this means, the more I've studied it, the more I realize, this is actually the kingdom that Jesus is talking about. Mm-hmm. Right? It comes very right back to New Testament and lots of things that aren't covered in traditional church, but very practical. So I met this guy. He didn't know me from Adam, but there's one session and then another breakout session. I came right back. I just was trying to absorb as much as I possibly could. I was like, that's it. That's right. That's true. And then it led me to a couple other people that I didn't realize this, but they've been talking about it since the 80s, early 80s. Decades of time has gone into this thought process, and enough to have trolls and people like, this and that. But that led me to connecting it to, I'm not just some random person thinking about this stuff on the side, but this is part of something bigger.
Awesome.
Yeah.
I'm just going to keep pressing into you and just let you keep talking.
Sure.
But so what would you say, what do you do now? What are you going to do now about it?
Well, in the last 6 months, there's been, just my own personal walk. The Lord's been showing me stuff and feeling the need to actually draw people physically together. Mm-hmm. There's many layers to this whole thing, and we're not all called to handle all of them. Although my brain is wired to appreciate all of them. It's like, I don't need to do it all, but it's like, somebody's got to do that. And somebody's probably got to do that. Oh, you're doing that? Great. Well, we need a little more of that. And so the idea of like drawing people together and doing what I just said, casting vision for this, like, this is actually possible for us to do, but we have to work together. And we need someone like master of ceremonies, like people operating at a high level to be like, hey, we could use a little more of this, a little less of that. Kind of like in war, like when you have two nations that even ally together, one nation still has to kind of like, somebody has to lead the whole circus, right? And that requires communication, getting together. What resources do you have? What resources do you have? Where are we at here? Where's the battle at? Who are we aimed at? What are the goals? What are the objectives? What's most important, right? All these things can be coordinated. And guess what? Guess who's doing that on the other side? Like, this is both good and bad. But because we have light on our side, the good guys, like we can kind of be pretty lackadaisical, because the second we use our influence, our authority that God gave us, the enemy goes running. The enemy doesn't have that. So he has to be extremely disciplined. Like we fast and pray, they fast and pray times 10. Whatever we do, times 10, times 100, because that's the only chance they have to hold any ground. They have their whole wicked schemes. So what would it look like though if we like used an ounce of our influence, used 10% of our influence, used 50% of our influence? Literally, I believe that is what building the kingdom of God actually is recognizing who we are fully in Christ, and then getting out of the church. It's not just sitting there in church learning some good lessons. It's enforcing the reality Jesus won for us at the cross, which requires us, A, to know it exists, know what that victory is, know what it means for our identity. You talk a lot about identity. And then what does it mean to apply it? That's where you get into purpose. You are on this earth for a reason that only you can accomplish the way you can accomplish. God built you for a specific reason. You do have free will. You do get to decide how much you want to engage in that. But I'm here to say it's real, because I didn't know this. I thought it might be real. I hoped it would be real. And then God showed me how it was real for me, and in turn showing how this is true for all of us as his children. He put us here just like an army. Like, everyone has a role to play, from what you might consider the smallest role to the most frontline, life-threatening type role, right? We need it all. The kingdom needs it all. But the second we even think about that, I'm telling you, in the kingdom of darkness, they shudder. And we're so used to being pushed around and, oh, woe is me, it sucks, this is that. What the Lord's been showing me is, that's one way to think about it. But once you understand the victory that you stand in Christ, and how the enemy looks at you, you look at things very different. He's terrified. He's absolutely terrified of us figuring out who we are and enforcing. You have to enforce these things, the legal rights that Jesus won for us. He earned the right over all powers, principalities, for us to tread on scorpions, all that stuff. But the example he showed me recently was this idea of an eviction notice. So how is it, Jason? Help me understand. We experience so much defeat or darkness or all these things in the world. How is it that we have victory? Like, the message I got growing up was victory was assured, but not for us. Not now, at least. So it's all together, close but far. That's not what Jesus is saying. The victory is now. It's for us to lay hold of. So how do we hold these things in tension? How is that even possible? So the Lord was showing me. I was asking these questions myself, and it was kind of like he was taking me through the legal system in the spiritual realm, how this stuff works, that it's kind of like an eviction notice where you have property, call it the promised land, something that is yours. It's legally yours. But guess what? You're not benefiting from it because somebody's there not paying rent, not doing their part, breaking covenant, breaking agreement, not supposed to be there. Okay. There's a judge that hands down an award and it says, nope, yep, you have the legal right to take that back. Okay. But if I didn't know that existed, I just have a house that's full. Oh, okay, I go over here to this court, I get this thing. All right, now what? Now you got to get the sheriff to meet you down there, the legal enforcement or the almost like the military side. You have to go there to take that agreement and say, leave. I have the right to be here. And once you do, guess what? We had this example. We had 23 people in a 5-bedroom house. And when we showed up and showed them the notice, they went flying like cockroaches out of a something. They went flying. And it was because they had no legal right and they knew it. And all you had to do was enforce it. And we lived that out for real with my wife and I, mostly my wife. But the Lord was showing me like that's not at all different with these 7 mountains. It's like, it's yours. You can have it, but you got to lay hold of it. You have to actually trust me. You have to actually talk to me, see who you are, understand who you are. By the way, there's probably a 10 to 20 year process. He leaves that, I want to leave that to figure out who you are and then to build your character to be the fullness of what that is. And then when you do that, you will be prepared to go into these areas. You need to spend time with him to know what that is, know who you are, know what resources you have available to you, what targets you're supposed to go after, and then trust him, which is another reason for that 10, 15 years of process. Well, it's a lifetime process actually, but boot camp. That you can trust him, that he is who he says he is. And whatever he calls you to do, whatever that might be, if you go with him in his timing, in his process, in his preparation, you are assured victory. You cannot lose. You will not lose. You might be scared crapless, because that's how it works oftentimes. But it's yours. It's yours for the taking. But you have to lay hold of it. And it made verses where it's like the kingdom is at hand come to life in a way. You hear this stuff, but you realize what it's talking about is like, it's here, it's now, it's for us, but it requires a spiritual eye to discern it, to recognize the truth of it, because it's a spiritual reality we're talking about to these things. To press into the Lord, more detail about it, and then to use the, again, spiritual rights that we have to these things to go out and do it. And guess what? That's a process. Like if you think about all the cells of the body, every one of us has a territory that we're uniquely called to cast the enemy out of, that we have all the ability to. But it isn't until the whole, you tell me, is it 3%, 5%, 10% before you start of people activating their rights, before you start to actually see the light spread, right? So I think we're in a season and time where the body is waking up to who they are. What does it mean truly to be a son or daughter? Son is really a role, so it's not a sex. What does it mean to be a son in the royal lineage of the Most High God? What does that mean? And you pull on that thread, you're going to end up in some pretty cool places.
I love that. And I would say a lot of it is, I can just sense the audience being like, feeling the disqualifications from the enemy. So you listen to somebody like Jason's story and you're like, oh, wow, what a titan, what a guy that's getting after it in the world. And you are. But that's the invitation for every single person. Even though as I'm saying it, you're probably feeling, yeah, but not me. You have all these reasons for why that can't be you. But it's like you look through the story of the Bible, it's consistent, and it's what Jesus is calling us into. Is you each have, it's easy to say, oh, you each have a unique role. But it matters a lot more than you think it does. All you need to do is start the conversation with God about it. Exactly what he described in the last couple minutes. God will reveal it to you one step at a time. As he reveals it to you, your confidence increases. You can start to walk more uprightly in this role of sonship of like, wow, I actually believe him a little bit more. That gives you this firepower and urgency to keep going. And so he described it back in his 20s of the process. He didn't even have the identity language yet, but he was going with what he was curious about. So as you're going, like if you're curious about this conversation, about what this looks like to talk to God about your identity, get your notebook out or whatever you want to get out to record and start writing down things that you're curious about, like things that you're excited about. Like what are the things, like Jason spent all those hours looking into this stuff. He wasn't getting paid for that. He was just curious about it. And he was prioritizing because he thought it mattered. He didn't know why it mattered, but he kept doing it and he kept prioritizing it. It's like we each have certain things like that we are interested in more than other people. And like that can potentially be very important data points into your design. The world's going to come in and say, that doesn't matter. That doesn't put money on the table. All these other reasons, it might not put money on the table this second, but like put a pin in it, write it down, start letting the Lord compile the evidence about how you're designed. If that becomes your main conversation, God, who are you? Who am I? How did you design me? What do you like about me? You start to like give him more chances to show you what he thinks about you. And then suddenly, oh, you're abiding in his love. You're asking him about his love, and he's telling you. And suddenly you're living in his love. What's going to happen in that state is you're going to become more untethered from what the world says and what the world thinks. And you're going to walk with this confidence that you've never experienced before. And in that, as you're becoming, he leads you in the next little steps and opens doors. And you're just meant to make a major impact somewhere, and don't let the enemy minimize it. Like that John 10:10, steal, kill, and the enemy's trying to steal, kill, and destroy. It's like that. You could read that verse and be like, oh, he's trying to kill you. It's like, sure, but God isn't allowing him to do that. Well, he's trying to mess with your identity. He's trying to mess up your calling. He's trying to not let you believe in like the genius that God made you to be in somewhere in society. So it's an invitation for everybody. And it's actually really exciting and really awesome. And it's a place where dreaming can kind of like fill your life again. At certain moments where it's like I feel so bogged down with everything that I can't dream. I can just get through the day. This conversation with God will breathe life into your life. Dreaming leads to a little bit of a more smile on your face, a little bit more imagination, which leads to some more joy, which leads to peace. And suddenly you've got these like nutrients from heaven actually like penetrating the earthly realm, and you're starting to just be fed by the Lord. And you're literally just starting to believe the truth instead of believing the lies. So this conversation is just a good starter to keep going with God as a daily exercise, and just watch your life change.
Amen. I mean, so many things from that, but like what you were getting at, it always starts small, first of all. But I constantly think about fingerprints. When you really get into the cosmic significance of every birth, every human being, God literally chose you, who you are, he put in you inspiration, visions, ideas, skills, abilities. And it's kind of our joy actually to discover what those are. Oftentimes we take them for granted. The things we take for granted are often the things we do the best. It's very easy to overlook what was uniquely gifted to us. But each of these are hints of our fingerprint of what makes us unique on this earth, and therefore speaks to the unique contribution we have. But I totally resonate with what you're saying about looking at people that are much further along than you, whatever you think. First of all, comparison is just a terrible thing. Not really at all helpful for the most part. But I think of someone like Joseph or some of these different stories where people followed God because that's what we do. And in the natural, had nothing to show for it for decades at a time. Or they would start to see something and then get thrown in a well, start to see something and they get thrown in jail. But as they were faithful to God at the right time, if you have the character, if you work on your character, you go through process, I don't care where you are in life. If you let God promote you and you just focus on growing and discovering and learning and serving, daily giving your life to something that matters, through that process, you guarantee at the right time, whatever that represents, that next step, you let God promote you, test him, and you'll see. So that's probably we got to keep things moving here, but good introduction.
Yeah, I want to touch one thing here at the buzzer here. You talked about the 10 or 20 years process, and that can feel daunting to some people. And I just want to throw a little encouragement out there. Just thinking back like Moses, where he got he killed that guy and then he went away for 40 years before he came back again. And it's almost like Jesus had more time to work with people back then. And I would say as time has gone on and we see where the world is headed now, the time is increasingly short. The urgency is now. The 10 and 20 years might get shrunk into 5 years.
Amen.
I did a huge part of my process in 8 months because my brain is uniquely wired to just what's next? And I just hammered this process with the Lord, but it was like an 8 months life change thing. Yeah. Because I knew what I was going.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people, the enemy is always trying to get you off this process once you start. But just as a jolt for people that the acceleration is coming because the Lord, you could say needs, but it's we have a place in this story.
Amen.
And that it's really important. So get in the process now and you will watch within months, you'll be discipling other people in stuff that you just grew out of. So it's get in the game.
Well, that made me think of, a lot of people talk about the season and time we're in as a season of awakening, where for whatever reason, there's some people I learned from that had a revelation 30 years ago, and I had something 20 years ago, 15-ish. The season and time we're in, we're stepping into an intense part of the battle, if you want to call it that. And just like when war breaks out in World War II, it don't matter where you're at, wherever you're at, you're needed. Mm-hmm. And you have the opportunity to step into that purpose for you in that moment. And a lot of times, World War II, for example, that was people thrown into boot camp. 6 months later, they're out on the front lines serving. And so I appreciate you saying that about time, because it can feel like, oh, yeah, what am I doing? There's a part of that just it doesn't matter, but also realize we are in a season of time where as people wake up, as soon as you're awake, as soon as you're, awake to some amount of this purpose, even an inkling, just follow that. And before you know it, you're going to be engaging in a way you've probably never experienced before. And it's fun. It's scary. It's exciting. It's life-giving. And it'll cost you. It's costly, but it's worth it.
Amen.
Just like war. That we won already. Cool. Well, it's a good place to stop for today.
Yeah.
We'll pick up a little bit more on this subject and just keep going on. Our goal ultimately is honestly to take some pretty big ideas and break them down as practically as possible so that every single person can just engage, where they're at, whoever they are, wherever they're at. talking to believers and people that want to be believers that don't even realize it yet. But we all, inside of us somewhere, know we're made for more. And that's what we're here to explore, what that more is. Have a great day.